The clock read 2:47 a.m. when Nathan Reed's flashlight died, plunging the 23rd floor corridor into darkness, broken only by emergency exit signs. He knelt in a spreading pool of water,
You don't
pipe
understand
wrench
what you're
slipping in his
asking.
calloused
I
hands.
don't have a choice.
But the burst valve wasn't what made his breath come short and panicked. Somewhere in this building, somewhere in 6 hours of scrambling through maintenance shafts and flooded equipment rooms, he had lost it. The keychain. His fingers worked blind through the grit and debris scattered across wet tile, searching with the desperation of a man who'd already buried too much. Not because it held keys to anything important. The single brass key attached had opened nothing for 2 years, not since Sarah's car went to the junkyard after the funeral. But the plastic charm clipped to the ring, scratched, faded, held together with electrical tape Nathan had wrapped around the crack last winter. That piece of dollar store craft kit carried more weight than anything else he owned. Lily had made it 3 weeks before her mother died, before the word cancer became something whispered in hospital corridors, before a 5-year-old learned that sometimes mommies don't come home. The charm showed a stick figure drawn in purple marker, cape flowing behind stick arms that reached toward a crayon sun. Letters wobbled across the bottom in a child's unsteady hand. "Come home safe, Daddy." A red heart, colored outside the lines, sat beside the words. On the back, Sarah had written Nathan's emergency contact number in Sharpie that had faded to brown. Nathan's supervisor, Pete, had laughed when he first saw it dangling from Nathan's belt loop. "What are you, 12? Carrying crafts from art class?" He never explained, never said, "My wife is dying and my daughter speaks less every day, and this stupid piece of plastic is the only thing that makes me remember there's a reason to keep breathing." Now it was gone. Water soaked through the knees of his blue maintenance uniform as he swept his hands wider across the floor. His toolbox lay open beside him, contents scattered, a wrench still wedged against the pipe junction he'd been sealing when he felt his belt loop catch and snap. He'd heard something hit the ground, but in the chaos of pressurized water spraying across expensive server equipment and the facilities manager shouting through his radio, Nathan had kept working. First rule of emergency maintenance: stop the flood, worry about everything else later. The flood was stopped. The server room was dry. His shift ended in 3 hours, and he had to pick up Lily from his father's house by 7 because George had a doctor's appointment at 8:30 and couldn't reschedule again. But none of that mattered if he couldn't find what his daughter checked for every single morning before school. "Does Daddy have his keychain?" Lily would ask George at breakfast, her small face serious. "Because if Daddy has his keychain, Mommy can protect him." Nathan had stopped trying to explain that ghosts don't work that way, that grief doesn't follow the logic a child needs to survive the unsurvivable. He just clipped the keychain to his belt every morning and let Lily inspect it, her fingers tracing the faded cape before she'd allow him to leave for work. He'd failed at enough promises. He couldn't fail this one. The emergency lights cast everything in shades of gray and sickly yellow. Nathan pulled himself to his feet, knees protesting the hours already spent crouched in awkward positions, fixing problems that paid just enough to cover rent and medical debt and the slowly accumulating costs of single fatherhood. His lower back had developed a permanent ache sometime in the last 6 months. He was 35 but felt 50 and knew he looked older than that. Sarah used to press her thumbs into the knots along his spine after late shifts, working out tension while they talked about Lily's day at preschool or whether they could afford to replace the washing machine before it completely died. Those conversations felt like they'd happened to different people in a different lifetime, behind a door that had locked permanently the day his wife stopped breathing in a hospice room that smelled like disinfectant and defeat. Nathan moved toward the stairwell access, playing his dead flashlight across the floor more from habit than hope. Maybe it had rolled. Maybe the water carried it somewhere. Maybe. "I think this belongs to you." The voice came from shadow near the elevators. A woman's voice, professional and measured, the kind of voice used to being heard in boardrooms rather than empty hallways at 3 in the morning. Nathan spun, hand instinctively moving to his belt where his radio should have been, before remembering he'd set it down while working. She stepped into the limited light, blonde hair pulled back in a style too neat for the hour, white silk blouse somehow crisp and unwrinkled, black slacks with a crease that suggested dry cleaning rather than home ironing. Small diamond studs caught the emergency lights. No wedding ring. Expensive leather bag slung over one shoulder. Everything about her screamed executive, someone who belonged in this building during business hours, not during the ghost shift when the only people present were maintenance workers and cleaning crews, and the occasional workaholic who'd rather sleep at their desk than go home to an empty apartment. In her right hand, held carefully between thumb and forefinger, was the keychain. Nathan's legs moved before his brain fully processed what he was seeing. He closed the distance in 4 long strides, hand outstretched, then caught himself just before grabbing. His palm was filthy with pipe grease and rust stains. The woman's blouse probably cost more than he made in a week. How did you? The words tangled in his throat. She placed the keychain gently in his palm, not recoiling from the dirt, her fingers cool and steady. "By the electrical panel on 22. I nearly stepped on it." Nathan closed his fist around the plastic charm, feeling the familiar edges, the tape ridge, the weight that wasn't weight but meaning. His throat constricted. He couldn't speak, could only stand there like an idiot while something in his chest unclenched for the first time in hours. The woman watched him with eyes that were either gray or blue. The lighting made it impossible to tell, assessing him with an intensity that would have made Nathan uncomfortable under normal circumstances. But these weren't normal circumstances. These were 3 a.m. circumstances, when regular rules suspended and strangers could witness your worst moments without judgment, because everyone at this hour was running from something. "Your daughter made it?" She asked it gently, not prying, just acknowledging what the crude drawing and child's handwriting made obvious. Nathan nodded, finally finding his voice. "She's 5. Was 3 when she drew it." He swallowed hard. "Her mother, my wife, she died 2 years ago. This was one of the last things they made together, before the hospital, before everything got." He stopped. Why was he telling this to a stranger? Why was she even here? But the woman's expression had softened into something that looked like understanding rather than pity, and Nathan found himself continuing despite every instinct that said maintenance workers don't bare their souls to women in $1,000 shoes. "Lily checks every morning before I leave for work. Make sure I'm wearing it. She thinks as long as I have it, her mom can keep me safe." His laugh came out broken. Kid logic. But I won't take that away from her. She's already lost too much. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was the kind of quiet that happens when someone actually hears what you've said instead of just waiting for their turn to talk. Nathan looked down at the keychain in his palm, at the stick figure with the cape, and felt the familiar grief rise up before he pushed it back down into the compartment where he kept everything he couldn't afford to feel during waking hours. "You work here?" he asked, needing to shift the moment back to something manageable. "Night shift?" "Something like that." A pause. "I have projects that require concentration, fewer distractions when the building is empty." "IT? Security systems?" "Adjacent to that." She didn't elaborate, and Nathan didn't push. He'd worked enough late shifts to know that people came to empty buildings to escape the same as they came to escape into them. Whatever she was avoiding at home, controlling spouse, bad roommate, insomnia born from stress, that was her business. I'm Nathan. Nathan Reed. Facilities maintenance. Usually work the graveyard shift fixing whatever breaks while everyone else is sleeping. I'm Tori. She shifted her bag higher on her shoulder, a gesture that suggested she was preparing to leave, but her feet didn't move. You should keep better track of that keychain. It's clearly important. I know, the pipe burst was bad. Water was heading straight for the server room. If those machines went down, the whole building would have been offline tomorrow. I was trying to stop it, and something caught my belt loop, and I felt it snap. But I couldn't stop to check, and by the time I got the valve sealed, he was babbling now, exhaustion and relief making him stupid. Tori held up one hand, stopping the flow of words. You were doing your job. Things happen. Her eyes dropped to the keychain again. But this, items given in love shouldn't be lost. They matter more than server uptime. Something in the way she said it made Nathan think she knew about loss firsthand, that she'd maybe stood in a hospital room or sat through a funeral or signed paperwork that officially ended something that was supposed to last forever. But her face had gone smooth and professional again, walls rebuilding, whatever moment of connection they'd shared dissolving into the fluorescent-lit reality of an office building at 3 a.m. I should get back to work. She stepped back toward the elevators. The night doesn't fix itself. Yeah, same. Nathan clipped the keychain back to his belt, checking twice that the loop was secure, that he could feel the weight of it against his hip. And thank you, really. You have no idea what this means. I think I might. The elevator dinged arrival. Tori stepped inside, turned to face him. Take care of yourself, Nathan Reed. And that daughter of yours. The doors closed before he could respond, leaving him alone in the hallway with wet knees and a recovered keychain and the strangest feeling that something had shifted in a way he couldn't quite name. He stood there longer than necessary, staring at the brushed steel elevator doors, before his radio crackled with Pete's voice demanding to know why Nathan hadn't reported back about the water damage assessment on floor 19. The rest of the shift blurred together in a sequence of pipe joints and valve checks and paperwork that required 3 signatures Nathan didn't understand. He kept touching the keychain every few minutes, confirming it was still there, still safe, a nervous tic he'd developed after the first time Lily cried because Daddy forgot his protection. By 6:15 a.m., Nathan was trudging toward his 15-year-old Ford pickup in the employee parking garage, body aching in all the familiar places and some new ones. His work boots squelched with each step, still damp from the flooding. His uniform had dried into stiff wrinkles. He smelled like pipe dope and mildew and the kind of exhaustion that soap couldn't wash away. The truck started on the 3rd try, engine coughing before settling into its usual rough idle. Nathan let it warm up while he sat in the driver's seat and closed his eyes, allowing himself 30 seconds of not moving, not thinking, not being responsible for anything. Sarah used to call these his decompression moments, the brief pause between work mode and dad mode where he could just be Nathan, not Nathan the widower or Nathan the provider, or Nathan the man who couldn't afford to fall apart because a 5-year-old depended on him. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Text from George. Lily's up, asking when you're coming. Made pancakes. Nathan typed back, 20 minutes, then pulled out of the parking space and headed toward the exit ramp. The drive to his father's house took him through streets just beginning to wake up, delivery trucks making early rounds, a few joggers out despite the October chill, stoplights cycling through their patterns for an audience of nobody. Nathan kept the radio off, preferring silence to the morning show hosts with their manufactured enthusiasm. He tried podcasts for a while, self-help bullshit about gratitude and mindfulness that Sarah's grief counselor had recommended. But the perky voices made him want to drive into a guardrail. George lived in a small ranch house in Riverside, the same house where Nathan had grown up, where his mother had died when he was 16 and his father had raised him alone, teaching by example how men handled loss. You kept going. You showed up. You put one foot in front of the other until the steps became automatic and the pain became something you carried instead of something that carried you. Nathan understood now, in ways he couldn't have at 16, exactly what those years had cost his father, what it meant to make breakfast every morning and pack school lunches and attend parent-teacher conferences alone, while pretending the empty chair beside you wasn't a crater that swallowed every good moment before you could hold on to it. The truck pulled into the driveway beside George's ancient Buick, and before Nathan could kill the engine, the front door burst open, and Lily came running out in her pajamas, blonde hair uncombed, bare feet on cold concrete. "Daddy!" She launched herself at him the moment he climbed down from the cab, small arms wrapping around his legs with the fierce intensity of someone who'd spent the night worried, despite all reassurances. Nathan scooped her up, ignoring his protesting back, breathing in the scent of children's shampoo and maple syrup. "Hey, princess, you're supposed to be wearing shoes outside." "Grandpa said you had to work late. Did the building break a lot?" "Just a water pipe. Nothing I couldn't fix." He carried her toward the house, where George stood in the doorway, wearing his usual morning uniform of flannel shirt and work pants, even though he'd been retired from his plumbing business for 3 years. Old habits died hard. "Morning, Dad." "Morning." George stepped aside to let them in, his assessing gaze taking in Nathan's damp uniform and the shadows under his eyes that never quite went away anymore. "Coffee's on. You look like you need a gallon." The house smelled like pancakes and coffee, and the specific combination of old newspapers and lemon furniture polish that Nathan associated with Sunday mornings throughout his childhood. George kept everything exactly as it had been when Nathan's mother was alive. Same floral couch, same TV with the antenna that needed adjusting, same collection of Reader's Digest condensed books on shelves no one read anymore. A shrine disguised as practicality. Nathan set Lily down, and she immediately grabbed his hand, tugging him toward the kitchen. "Grandpa made chocolate chip pancakes. The good kind, with lots of chips." "The good kind, huh?" Nathan let himself be pulled along, catching his father's slight smile. George had never been demonstrative with affection, showing love through actions rather than words, making favorite foods, fixing broken toys without being asked, staying up late to help with homework he barely understood. The same way Nathan tried to show up for Lily now, hoping competence could substitute for the emotional availability he didn't know how to access anymore. Lily climbed into her usual chair at the small kitchen table, immediately reaching for the syrup. Nathan intercepted her hand before she could drown her plate. "Easy, kiddo. Grandpa doesn't want to buy stock in the syrup company." "But it tastes better with lots." "It tastes like a sugar coma with lots." Nathan cut her pancakes into manageable pieces, a ritual so automatic his hands moved without thought. "Eat the fruit, too. Grandpa didn't cut up those strawberries for decoration." George poured coffee into Nathan's usual mug, white ceramic with Dad written in permanent marker by a much younger Lily, the letters crooked and enthusiastic. He set it down without comment, then returned to the stove where his own breakfast sat cooling. They ate in the companionable silence of people who'd shared enough meals that conversation wasn't required. Lily kicked her feet against her chair legs, focused entirely on drowning each bite in syrup despite Nathan's rationing. George read yesterday's newspaper, folded to the crossword he'd been working on. Nathan drank his coffee and felt his body slowly remember it was supposed to be awake. After a few minutes, Lily looked up from her plate, syrup on her chin. "Daddy, did you have your keychain?" Nathan's hand moved automatically to his belt, to the plastic charm he'd almost lost, the charm that proved he could still keep one promise, even if he'd failed at bigger ones. "Right here, Princess. Just like always." She leaned over to inspect it, sticky fingers touching the faded cape, the crooked letters. Her small face was serious, the way it always got when she performed this ritual. "Good, because if you don't have it, Mommy can't watch over you." Something in Nathan's chest constricted, the same painful squeeze that happened every time Lily spoke about her mother in present tense, as if death was just a long trip and Sarah might walk through the door any moment asking about their days. The grief counselor said not to correct her, that children processed loss differently, that Lily would come to understanding in her own time. But Nathan sometimes wondered if his daughter had the right idea, keeping Sarah alive in small ways, allowing her to exist in protective magic and mourning rituals. Maybe that was healthier than his own method, shoving everything into a locked compartment and hoping it stayed contained. "That's right, baby. Mommy keeps me safe." The lie came easily now, after 2 years of practice. George looked up from his crossword, caught Nathan's eye, said nothing. But his expression held understanding, the kind that came from walking the same path decades earlier. Lily went back to her pancakes, satisfied that the universe's protective mechanisms remained intact. Nathan finished his coffee and felt himself starting to crash, the adrenaline that had carried him through the shift finally burning off, leaving only exhaustion and the knowledge that he had maybe 4 hours to sleep before he needed to pick Lily up from kindergarten at noon. "You working again tonight?" George asked, which was his way of offering to take Lily again without making it sound like charity. "Yeah, same shift. I can be back here by 6 tomorrow morning, if that works." "Works fine. We'll do dinner and a movie. That new animated thing about the singing rabbits is on the streaming service." Lily's head shot up. "Singing rabbits?" "If you eat all your fruit," George said, and Lily immediately began shoveling strawberries into her mouth with renewed enthusiasm. Nathan stood, gathering his dishes, moving toward the sink before George waved him off. "I got it. You look dead on your feet. Go home. Sleep." "Dad, go." George's voice held the particular firmness that Nathan recognized from his own childhood. The tone that meant argument was futile. "Lily and I have a full day planned. Science experiments with baking soda. Very important educational activities." "Explosions," Lily added helpfully. "Controlled chemical reactions," George corrected, but his eyes were smiling. "Different thing entirely." Nathan knew he should protest more, should insist on taking Lily home, should be the kind of father who didn't rely on his own father to pick up the slack while he worked insane hours for mediocre pay. But the truth was, he needed the help. Needed these mornings where George handled breakfast and entertainment, while Nathan got a few hours of unconsciousness before the cycle started again. "Thank you," he said quietly, the words covering more than just one morning. George nodded, understanding everything Nathan wasn't saying. "Family takes care of family. That's how it works." Nathan kissed Lily's syrup-sticky cheek, endured her tight hug and her reminder to keep his keychain safe, then escaped to his truck before he could see the worry in his father's eyes that never quite faded, the concern that Nathan was grinding himself down to nothing, and one day there'd be nothing left. The drive home took 15 minutes through streets now fully awake with morning traffic. Nathan's apartment was in a complex that had been built in the 70s and showed its age in cracked parking lot asphalt and rust stains around the exterior outlets. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, thin walls that transmitted every argument and bass-heavy movie from neighboring units. But it was clean, and the rent was manageable, and the school district was decent, which was all that mattered. He let himself into the quiet space, dropped his keys in the bowl by the door that still held Sarah's old gym membership card because he couldn't bring himself to throw it away. The living room was tidy in the way of places where people didn't really live, just existed between obligations. Lily's toys were organized in bins under the TV. The couch was the same one they'd bought used when they first got married. Photos on the walls showed a younger Nathan and a woman with dark hair and a smile that suggested she didn't know what was coming, that cancer would take her at 33, that their daughter would barely remember her voice. Nathan stood in the middle of the room for a moment, feeling the weight of the empty space, before forcing himself toward the bathroom. Shower. Sleep. That was the plan. But in the bathroom mirror, he caught sight of his own reflection. 35 going on 50. Lines around his eyes that hadn't been there 3 years ago. Stubble that was coming in with more gray each month. Sarah used to trace those emerging gray hairs with her fingers, calling them distinguished. Now they just looked like evidence of time passing without her, of a life continuing in ways neither of them had planned. He stripped off his damp uniform, turned the shower as hot as it would go, and stood under the spray until his skin turned red and the water ran cold. The exhaustion was bone deep now, pulling him toward unconsciousness with the gravity of inevitability. Nathan managed to pull on clean sweatpants before collapsing onto his unmade bed. His last conscious thought was of the keychain on his nightstand, the plastic charm catching the light from the window, and the woman who'd found it, Tori, standing in that hallway at 3 a.m., like an apparition from some other life where executives and maintenance workers existed in the same universe for reasons beyond broken pipes and emergency repairs. Then sleep took him, dreamless and heavy, the sleep of someone who'd learned not to expect rest to be restful. He woke to his phone alarm at 11:30, 4 hours gone in what felt like minutes, his body protesting movement with the enthusiasm of someone twice his age. The apartment was still quiet, still empty, still bearing that quality of waiting for something that would never arrive. Nathan dressed in clean jeans and a flannel shirt, ran a hand through his hair that did nothing to improve its appearance, and headed back out to pick up Lily from school. The afternoon would be homework and dinner and bath time and bedtime stories. The routine that gave shape to days that otherwise threatened to blur into one endless repetition of work and worry and the low-grade grief that never quite left, just learned to be quieter. But as he climbed back into his truck, Nathan found himself thinking about Tori again, about the way she'd held the keychain like it mattered, the gentleness in her voice when she asked about Lily. Most people in this city looked through service workers like they were part of the furniture. But she'd seen him. Really seen him. Probably just because of the unusual circumstances, Nathan told himself. 3 a.m. made everyone strange. By tomorrow, she'd forget the maintenance guy who lost his daughter's keychain. By next week, he'd forget the blonde executive who found it. That was how these things worked. Nathan started the truck and headed toward Riverside Elementary, toward the afternoon pickup line and Lily's excited chatter about her day and the evening routine that awaited. Behind him, the Crosstech Tower stood against the October sky, its windows reflecting clouds, keeping its secrets, including whatever had brought a woman in expensive clothes to the 22nd floor at 3 in the morning, looking for concentration in the empty spaces where no one could see her be anything other than what her life required. Thence to be 3 nights later, Nathan was on his knees in a utility closet on the 18th floor, wrestling with a pressure valve that had apparently decided retirement was preferable to function. when he heard footsteps in the corridor outside. Not the soft rubber-soled shuffle of the cleaning crew or the heavy work boots of other maintenance staff. These were different. The sharp, measured click of professional shoes on industrial tile, someone moving with purpose through spaces meant for people who fixed things rather than people who owned them. The footsteps stopped just outside his open door. Nathan didn't look up immediately, focused on the valve that refused to turn despite his best efforts and the creative profanity he was directing at its ancestors. His shoulders ached from the awkward angle. His fingers were already developing the calluses on top of calluses that marked his profession, and he had 6 more items on his work order before the shift ended at 7 a.m. "Apparently we meet again, Mr. Reed." The voice made him freeze, wrench halfway through a turn because he recognized it. Professional, measured, the kind of voice that expected to be heard. Nathan twisted around, still on his knees, and found Tori standing in the doorway with 2 paper cups of what smelled like actual coffee rather than the motor oil substitute the break room machine produced. She looked different tonight, though it took Nathan's tired brain a moment to identify why. Same expensive clothes, charcoal slacks, cream-colored silk blouse, but her hair was down instead of pulled back, falling past her shoulders in a way that suggested she'd been running her hands through it. The controlled perfection from their first meeting had developed cracks. She looked human now, touched by whatever 3 a.m. demons had driven her into these empty hallways. Tori. Nathan realized he was still kneeling and stood up too quickly, his head swimming slightly from the shift in elevation and 6 hours of maintenance work on 4 hours of sleep. What are you doing here? I work here, remember? Adjacent to IT. Lots of projects requiring concentration. She held out one of the cups. Also, I noticed you've been on this floor for the last hour. Thought you might need caffeine. Nathan looked at the offered cup, then down at his hands, which were covered in grease and rust flakes, and the general grime that came with fixing the building's circulatory system. I'm going to get that dirty. It's a paper cup. They're disposable. When he still hesitated, she added, Please take it. I made too much and can't drink both without vibrating through the walls. He accepted the cup carefully, trying to touch only the sleeve, and nearly groaned at the first sip. Real coffee. Good coffee. The kind that cost more per cup than he typically spent on entire meals. Thank you. You didn't have to do this. I know. Tori leaned against the doorframe, cradling her own cup, and Nathan noticed the shadows under her eyes that matched his own, the particular exhaustion that came from not sleeping by choice rather than necessity. How's your daughter? Lily, right? She's good. Happy. Currently convinced she's going to be a marine biologist who specializes in rainbow fish. Nathan smiled despite himself. Last week it was astronaut. Week before that, professional cookie taster. Ambitious career path, cookie tasting, competitive field. She's very qualified, can eat her weight in Oreos. They stood in the awkward silence that followed small talk between strangers who'd shared one moment of connection and weren't sure how to navigate toward a second. The utility closet suddenly felt very small, the hallway very empty, the night very long. Nathan became acutely aware that he was a maintenance worker, covered in grime, talking to a woman who probably had an office on the executive floor. That nothing about this interaction made sense by daylight rules, even if 3 a.m. logic allowed it. But Tori didn't seem in a hurry to leave. She sipped her coffee and watched him with that same assessing intensity from before, like she was trying to solve an equation that didn't add up in expected ways. Do you always work this floor? she asked. Or do you rotate? Depends on what breaks. Tonight it's the 18th floor that hates me. Pressure valves, stuck hinges, a toilet that's running constantly in the women's room near the elevator bank. Nathan gestured at the closet behind him. Glamorous work. Someone's got to keep the building functioning while everyone else dreams. I never thought about that. All the things that have to work perfectly for people to do their jobs without noticing. Tori tilted her head slightly. How long have you done this? Maintenance? About 7 years. But I started in my dad's plumbing business when I was 16. Learned on the job. No college, no fancy certifications. Just hands-on work until I could tell what's wrong with the system by the sound it makes when it fails. He heard himself talking and wondered when he'd started offering his life story to near strangers. Why are you really here at 3 a.m? What kind of projects need this much concentration? Something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe, that he'd asked directly, or appreciation that he'd turned the conversation around. The honest answer? I can't sleep in my apartment. Too quiet. Too empty. Too much time to think about everything I've sacrificed to get here. She paused. That was probably too honest. 3 a.m. makes everyone too honest. It's the only time truth doesn't cost extra. Nathan leaned against the wall opposite her, matching her casual posture, even though nothing about this felt casual. Where's here exactly? What do you do in this building? I manage projects, large-scale implementations, system overhauls. The answer came smoothly, practiced, the kind of vague response that revealed nothing while sounding specific. Mostly I make sure the technology everyone depends on doesn't collapse under its own weight. So when I keep water from flooding the server room, I'm protecting your work. In a roundabout way, yes. They drank their coffee in a silence that had shifted from awkward to almost comfortable. 2 night shift workers sharing space in the empty hours when the rest of the city slept. Nathan found himself studying her face in the fluorescent light, noticing details the emergency lighting had hidden before. The slight lines at the corners of her eyes that suggested she smiled more than her current serious expression indicated. The way she held tension in her jaw. The expensive watch on her wrist that probably cost more than Nathan's truck. Everything about her screamed different universe, different life, different set of problems than the ones Nathan wrestled with daily. She probably worried about stock portfolios and whether to buy property in the mountains for weekend getaways. Nathan worried about whether the truck would pass inspection and if he could stretch the grocery budget another week before having to dip into the emergency fund that never grew fast enough. But here they were, drinking coffee at 3:15 in the morning outside a utility closet, and somehow it didn't feel as absurd as it should have. I should let you work, Tori said finally, pushing off from the doorframe. That valve isn't going to fix itself. Probably not. It's being particularly stubborn tonight. Nathan held up his cup. Thanks for this. Made the shift significantly better. You're welcome. She turned to leave, then paused. Nathan, if you're around tomorrow night, same time, I'll probably be on the 15th floor. Better windows, better view of the city. If you wanted to take a break. It wasn't quite an invitation, and wasn't quite not an invitation. It existed in that gray space where 2 people acknowledged mutual interest in continued conversation without admitting what that meant. I'm usually on the 15th floor around 2:30, Nathan heard himself say. Pressure checks on the ventilation system, required weekly maintenance. 2:30 then. Tori's smile was small but genuine. Don't forget to bring your keychain. She walked away before he could respond, her footsteps fading down the corridor, leaving Nathan standing in the utility closet doorway with an empty coffee cup and the strange sensation that something in his carefully controlled universe had just tilted slightly off its axis. He went back to the stubborn valve with renewed energy, managed to get it functioning within 20 minutes, and spent the rest of his shift catching himself smiling for no particular reason while checking pressure gauges and clearing drain traps. Every time his radio crackled with another request from Pete, Nathan found himself thinking about tomorrow night, about the 15th floor, about coffee and conversation, and a woman who looked at him like he was a person rather than a uniform. It was stupid. It was dangerous. It was exactly the kind of complication Nathan had sworn off after Sarah died, when his world contracted to the manageable boundaries of work and Lily and the day-to-day survival that left no room for anything else. But when he touched the keychain on his belt, Lily's purple stick figure, Sarah's fading phone number, the whole weight of his life reduced to a plastic charm, Nathan felt something shift inside him. A small voice that sounded suspiciously like his dead wife whispered, "You're allowed to be lonely. You're allowed to be human." He pushed the thought away and finished his shift, picked up Lily from George's house while she chattered about the Singing Rabbit movie, drove home through dawn-lit streets to sleep through another day. But that night, when he returned to Crosstech Tower and clipped his work order to his belt beside the keychain, Nathan found himself moving a little faster through the lower floors, rushing through the mandatory checks, making sure he'd be on the 15th floor by 2:30, like he'd promised, like someone was waiting. The 15th floor was darker than the 18th, more of the lights shut off for the night, emergency exits providing the only illumination. Nathan's flashlight beam cut through shadow as he moved toward the ventilation access panel near the northeast corner, where windows stretched floor to ceiling and the city spread out below like a circuit board of lights and movement and lives being lived. He was 10 minutes early. The pressure check would take maybe 15 minutes. Then he'd move to the 16th floor and continue his rounds and pretend he hadn't adjusted his entire schedule around a woman he barely knew. But at 2:28, Tori appeared from the direction of the stairwell, carrying what looked like a small thermos and 2 cups. She'd changed clothes since the previous night. Dark jeans, a loose sweater that suggested she'd stopped pretending she was here for work reasons, and her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail that made her look younger, less like the polished executive and more like someone who might have graduated from Nathan's high school if their lives had overlapped. "I thought you might be here," she said by way of greeting. "Pressure checks wait for no one." Nathan set down his clipboard. "What's in the thermos?" "Tea, actually. I figured we maxed out on coffee last night." She poured carefully into both cups, steam rising in the cool air. "It's chamomile. Good for insomnia." "Do I look like I have insomnia?" "You look like someone who doesn't sleep enough by choice, which is adjacent." Tori handed him a cup and moved toward the windows, staring out at the city sprawl. "This is better than the 18th floor. You can actually see the bridges from here." Nathan joined her at the window, standing close enough to see her reflection in the glass, but maintaining the careful distance of 2 people who hadn't decided yet what they were becoming. "I don't usually stop to look at the view. Too busy making sure the building doesn't fall apart." "Maybe you should stop sometimes. Might remind you why you're doing all this." "I do it because buildings require maintenance, and I need a paycheck. Not much philosophy involved." "There's always philosophy involved." Tori turned to face him, her expression serious in the dim light. "Why night shift? You have a daughter who probably wants to see you during normal hours." The question was more direct than Nathan expected, cutting through the small talk straight to the complicated reality he navigated daily. He considered deflecting, keeping things light, but 3 a.m. had its own gravity, and dishonesty required too much energy. "Pays better. 30% shift differential. I need every dollar I can get." Nathan wrapped both hands around the warm cup. "Medical debt for my wife's treatment, rent, childcare, future school costs. It adds up fast." Night shift means I see Lily in the mornings and evenings. My dad helps fill the gaps. It's not perfect, but it works. That must be exhausting. It's life. You do what's necessary. He paused. What about you? Why are you really in this building at 3 a.m.? You said yesterday it's because your apartment is too quiet, but I'm guessing there's more to it. Tori was quiet for a long moment, sipping her tea, her eyes distant. I got divorced a year ago. My ex-husband said I loved my career more than I loved him, and he wasn't wrong. I built my professional life by sacrificing everything personal, friends, hobbies, marriage. Now I have the career I wanted and nothing else. Her laugh was sharp, self-deprecating. So I come here because at least at work, my presence makes sense. I know who I'm supposed to be. Who are you supposed to be? Successful, driven, someone who made all the right choices for all the wrong reasons. She looked at him directly. The ice queen of the tech sector, that's what they call me in meetings, like it's a compliment. Nathan couldn't imagine anyone looking at this woman, tired and honest, and standing in a dark office building drinking chamomile tea and seeing ice. But he understood the labels that got assigned, the ways people reduced you to the parts that were easiest to manage. My label is the janitor's husband, he offered. That's what the other maintenance guys called Sarah when she'd bring Lily by to visit me at work. Like her whole identity was defined by who she married. Meanwhile, she was working on a nursing degree, raising a kid, managing a terminal diagnosis with more grace than I've ever had. His throat tightened. Labels are bullshit. Agreed. Tori raised her cup in a small toast. To being more than our labels. They drank to the sentiment, and Nathan found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't with another adult in longer than he could remember. With George, everything was filtered through their father-son relationship and the shared grief they never quite discussed. With Danny Walsh and the other guys at work, conversations stayed surface level, sports and weather and complaints about management. But Tori asked real questions and seemed genuinely interested in the answers, and that kind of attention felt almost dangerous in how good it was. Your daughter, Lily, what's she like? Tori asked. Beyond her marine biology ambitions. Nathan felt his face soften the way it always did when talking about his daughter. She's smart. Scary smart sometimes. Picks up on emotions I'm trying to hide. She has this thing where she arranges her stuffed animals by color every night before bed. Has to be in the exact right order or she can't sleep. Very particular, he smiled. She doesn't talk about her mom much, but she draws pictures, always the same 3 figures. Her, me, and this floating angel with Sarah's dark hair. How does she do at school? With other kids? Mostly good. Some days she gets quiet, pulls inside herself. The school counselor says that's normal grief response. Some days she's louder than usual, like she's compensating. Those are harder to watch. Nathan stared out at the city. I keep waiting for her to fall apart completely. But kids are tougher than adults. They bend instead of breaking. Or they break in ways we can't see yet. Tori's voice was gentle. My mom died when I was 12. Cancer. I thought I was handling it fine, but looking back, I can see all the ways it shaped me. Made me afraid to depend on anyone. Afraid to build relationships that could be taken away. Is that why your marriage ended? Probably, among other reasons. She turned to face him fully. I'm not good at letting people in. I control everything I can control because the things I can't control are terrifying. It's not a healthy way to live. Yeah, well, I'm not exactly a poster child for healthy living either. Nathan gestured at himself. 35 years old, working graveyard shifts, living in a crappy apartment because I can't afford better, raising a kid alone while trying to figure out how to be both parents at once. I'm failing at basically everything except showing up. Showing up is 80% of parenting, maybe 90%. What about the other 10 or 20%? Love, which you clearly have. Tori set down her cup and moved closer, close enough that Nathan could smell her perfume. Something subtle and expensive that made him hyper-aware of the grease under his fingernails and the fact that he probably still smelled like the drain he'd unclogged on the 12th floor. But she didn't seem to notice or care. She was looking at him like he mattered, like this conversation at 3 a.m. in an empty office building was the most important thing happening in the entire city. "Can I ask you something personal?" Nathan said quietly. "You can ask. I reserve the right not to answer." "Why are you talking to me?" "Really talking, I mean. Not just being polite to the help." The words came out more bitter than he'd intended, years of being invisible to executives bleeding into his tone. Tori didn't flinch. "Because when you thought you'd lost that keychain, you looked like someone who'd lost everything that mattered. Not because of what it was worth, but because of what it meant. That kind of honest emotion is rare in my world." She paused. "Also because you're the first person in recent memory who asked me questions like I'm a person instead of a position. You are a person." "I forget that sometimes." They stood in the darkness, the city lights beyond the windows painting everything in amber and shadow, and Nathan felt something dangerous taking root in his chest. Not love. Too soon for that. Too complicated for someone who could barely keep his own life together. But recognition, maybe. The sense that this woman understood something essential about loneliness, about the performance of keeping it together while slowly coming apart inside. His radio crackled with Pete's voice requesting status update on the 15th floor checks. Nathan unclipped it, pressed the button. 15 is clear. Moving to 16. Copy that. He clipped the radio back to his belt, next to the keychain, and caught Tori watching the gesture with an expression he couldn't quite read. "I should let you work," she said, but didn't move. "Yeah, probably." But Nathan didn't move either. The silence stretched between them, full of things neither was ready to say. Then Tori's phone buzzed in her pocket, shattering the moment. She pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and her professional mask slid back into place, shoulders straightening, expression smoothing, the executive reasserting control. "I have to take this." She stepped away, answering with a crisp, "Victoria Blake speaking." And Nathan felt the distance open up again between their universes. He gathered his tools and moved toward the 16th floor, leaving her to her call, trying not to think about how her full name, Victoria Blake, sounded like money and power, and 100 different reasons why whatever had just happened needed to stop happening. But the next night, he found himself on the 15th floor again at 2:30, and she was there with her thermos, and they talked until 4 about everything and nothing. His daughter's latest school project, her frustration with board meetings, the ways they both used work to avoid facing what was missing from their lives. It became a routine over the following 2 weeks. Nathan would find her waiting somewhere in the building, different floor each time, like she was exploring the architecture during her insomnia, and they'd share tea or coffee and conversation that grew progressively more personal, more honest, more dangerous with each encounter. The break room television had been showing muted news all night, the same cycle of headlines Nathan had learned to ignore during his shifts. But at 1:40 a.m., while waiting for instant ramen to cool enough to eat, he glanced up at the screen and felt the world tilt sideways. Victoria Blake, CEO of Blake Industries, stood behind a podium at some conference, her blonde hair styled in a way that made her look severe and powerful. The chyron read, "Blake Industries announces cybersecurity expansion." She wore a navy suit that probably cost what Nathan made in 2 months, diamond earrings catching the camera lights, every inch of her radiating the kind of authority that moved markets and crushed competitors. Nathan's plastic fork clattered into the styrofoam cup, splashing broth across the counter. CEO. Not project manager, not IT adjacent. Chief Executive Officer of Blake Industries, the cybersecurity firm that occupied 12 floors of Crosstech Tower, the company whose server room he'd saved from flooding 3 weeks ago. His Tory. Except she wasn't his anything. She was a billionaire playing dress down in jeans and sweaters, slumming with the night janitor for reasons Nathan couldn't begin to understand. The Raman sat forgotten as he stared at the screen, watching footage of Victoria addressing shareholders, cutting ribbons at new facility openings, shaking hands with politicians. The woman on TV bore little resemblance to the person who brought him tea at 3 a.m. and talked about her failed marriage like it was a wound that hadn't healed. That woman was human, vulnerable, real. This woman was a corporation in designer heels. Danny Walsh appeared in the doorway, carrying his own sad dinner. "You see that? Blake herself. Heard she's worth like $3 billion. Can you imagine having that kind of money?" Nathan couldn't speak, could only watch as the screen showed Victoria, Tory, laughing at something an interviewer asked, her professional smile revealing nothing of the loneliness she'd confessed during their midnight conversations. "Reed, you okay? You look like you saw a ghost." He found his voice, kept it carefully neutral. "Yeah, just tired." Danny settled into a chair, eyes still on the television. "My cousin works in her executive suite. Says Blake's a ball buster. Fires people for showing up 2 minutes late. Calls emergency meetings at midnight. Total ice queen." He shoveled food into his mouth, oblivious to Nathan's white-knuckled grip on the counter edge. "Brilliant, though. Built that company from nothing. Started in her garage 15 years ago, now it's worth billions." The broadcast shifted to stock footage of Blake Industries' headquarters, and Nathan forced himself to look away before Danny noticed something was wrong. He dumped his ramen in the trash, appetite gone, and headed back toward the elevator banks with mechanical precision. She'd lied. Not outright. Every word she'd said was technically true, but she'd let him believe she was someone she wasn't. Let him pour out stories about medical debt and struggling to make rent, while she probably had more money than Nathan would see in 10 lifetimes. Let him worry about whether she judged his dirty hands in second-hand clothes, while she wore watches that cost more than his truck. The humiliation burned hotter than the anger. All those conversations where he'd tried so hard to be someone worth talking to, where he'd hoped maybe, despite the obvious differences, they'd found some genuine connection. It had all been what? Entertainment for a bored billionaire? Research into how the other half lived? Nathan jabbed the elevator button with more force than necessary, his mind replaying every interaction through this new lens. The way she'd appeared on the 22nd floor that first night made sense now. It was probably her floor, her office, her building in every way that mattered. The expensive coffee, the thermos of fancy tea, the ease with which she navigated empty corridors at 3 a.m. Of course she belonged here. She owned 12 floors of it. The elevator dinged open. Nathan stepped inside and slammed his palm against the button for the 19th floor, with enough force to make his hand sting. He had pressure valves to check, drains to clear, 100 small maintenance tasks that would carry him through the rest of this shift without having to think about the woman who'd made him feel seen for the first time in 2 years. Except thinking about her was all he could do. His radio crackled. Pete's voice. "Reed, you got a major issue on 23. Ceiling sprinkler system activated in the east wing. Water's coming down heavy. Get up there now." Nathan's jaw clenched. 23. Of course it was 23, where this whole thing started with a lost keychain and a woman who'd seemed too good to be true, because she was. He diverted the elevator, watching the numbers climb, trying to push everything else aside and focus on the immediate crisis. Water damage was expensive. Water damage to equipment was catastrophic. Whatever his personal issues, the building still needed him to function. The elevator opened onto chaos. Sprinklers were dumping water across the entire eastern corridor, alarms shrieking, emergency lights strobing. Nathan could see at least 4 office doors standing open, water streaming across carpets and tile, heading inexorably toward the equipment closet that housed networking infrastructure for half the floor. He ran, boots splashing through rapidly deepening water, racing against time and physics. The equipment closet door was locked. Of course it was locked. And Nathan fumbled with his master keyring, hands shaking from adrenaline and the cold fury still burning in his chest. The lock finally gave. Nathan yanked the door open and was hit by a waterfall from above. A pipe junction had split, spraying pressurized water directly onto the server racks below. Sparks flickered where water met electrical components. This wasn't just bad. This was catastrophic. Nathan keyed his radio, shouting over the alarms. "Pete, I need power cut to floor 23 immediately. We're about to have electrical fires." "On it." He couldn't wait. The servers were already smoking, the smell of burning electronics mixing with wet carpet and panic. Nathan found the emergency cutoff for the sprinkler system, yanked the lever hard enough to hurt his shoulder. The water flow decreased, but didn't stop. The broken pipe was still dumping pressure. His toolbox was 18 floors down. His emergency kit was in his locker. All he had was what was clipped to his belt and his own 2 hands, and the certain knowledge that if he didn't stop this in the next 60 seconds, Blake Industries would lose data worth millions. Nathan grabbed the broken pipe junction with both hands, ignoring the freezing water, and pulled with every ounce of strength he possessed. Metal groaned. His fingers slipped. He adjusted his grip and pulled again, muscles screaming, until something gave with a crack that echoed over the alarms. The pipe section came free in his hands, water spraying directly into his face now, blinding him. But the angle had changed. Instead of hitting the servers, the water was shooting toward the floor. Nathan stumbled backward, nearly falling, then dropped the pipe section and grabbed for anything he could use to seal the break. His jacket. Nathan ripped it off, wadded it into a ball, and jammed it into the pipe opening with enough force to compress the fabric into a temporary plug. The spray reduced to a trickle. Not perfect, but enough to buy time. The lights went out as Pete killed power to the floor. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in red. Nathan stood in ankle-deep water, soaked to the skin, breathing hard, staring at the smoking servers that were, miraculously, not actually on fire. Footsteps splashed behind him. He turned, expecting Pete or another maintenance worker, and found Tori instead, wearing a raincoat that suggested she'd grabbed it on the way up, her face pale in the emergency lighting. "Nathan." She stopped short, taking in the flooded corridor, his soaked clothes, the jerry-rigged pipe seal. Her eyes went wide. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine." His voice came out flat, emotionless, the anger from earlier crystallizing into something cold and immovable. Servers are intact, mostly. You'll need to call your IT team to assess damage. I don't care about the servers right now. Your hands are bleeding. Nathan looked down. She was right. His palms were torn up from the metal pipe, blood mixing with water, dripping onto the wet floor. He hadn't felt it through the adrenaline. It's nothing. I've had worse. Tori moved closer, reaching for his hands, but Nathan stepped back, putting the equipment closet door frame between them. Something in his expression must have registered because she froze, her own hands dropping. What's wrong? Her voice was careful, controlled, the executive voice he'd heard on the news broadcast. When were you planning to tell me? The question came out sharper than Nathan intended, 2 weeks of late-night conversations and growing feelings curdling into betrayal. That you're not just some project manager, that you're Victoria Blake, CEO, billionaire, the person who actually owns this building. Tori's face went carefully blank, the mask he'd watched her wear on television sliding into place. You saw the news? Yeah, I saw it. You and your $3 billion and your board meetings and your reputation as the ice queen of tech. Nathan laughed, the sound bitter even to his own ears. All this time, I thought we were just two people working late, having honest conversations. But you were lying the whole time. I never lied to you. You let me believe you were something you're not. You let me talk about medical debt and struggling to make rent while you're worth more money than I can conceptually understand. Do you have any idea how humiliating that is? Tori flinched like he'd hit her, but her voice stayed level. I didn't tell you because I wanted someone to see me. Not my net worth, not my company. Just me. Is that so terrible? Yes! Because I couldn't see you. I was seeing whoever you were pretending to be. Some woman who understood what it's like to struggle, who knew what real problems felt like. Nathan gestured at the flooded corridor, at the building around them. You own 12 floors of this tower. I clean them. Those aren't the same universes. I thought we'd moved past that. Past the class difference. We can't move past it because it's always there. Every conversation we had, you were slumming with the help for your own entertainment. Was it interesting, seeing how the poor people live? Tori's composure cracked, anger flashing across her features. That's not fair. You know that's not what this was. Do I? Because from where I'm standing, you played dress-up in casual clothes and fed me lines about understanding loneliness while you went home to a penthouse I couldn't afford to park my truck near. I was honest about my divorce, about my mother dying, about everything except my job title. Your job title is who you are. It's the reason you move through the world the way you do. The reason you can afford to be in this building at 3 a.m. instead of working a second shift to pay bills. Everything you told me was filtered through a privilege so massive you don't even see it anymore. They stood in the red emergency lighting, water still dripping from broken pipes, the gap between them wider than the flooded corridor. Tori's hands were shaking. Nathan noticed it even through his anger, but her voice stayed steady when she spoke. You're right. I should have told you from the beginning. But I was afraid if you knew, you'd look at me differently. Like everyone else does. Like I'm just a bank account with legs. At least that would have been honest. Nathan pressed his torn palms against his wet pants, the sting grounding him. I shared things with you I haven't told anyone. About Sarah, about feeling like I'm failing Lily every day, about being so tired I can't remember what it feels like to not be exhausted. His voice cracked despite his best efforts. And you just collected those stories like data points, while keeping yourself protected behind walls of money I'll never climb. That's not. Tori stopped, seeming to realize anything she said would only make it worse. What do you want from me, Nathan? An apology? You have it. I'm sorry. I should have been honest about my position. I don't want an apology. I want this to have been real. But it can't be, because you're Victoria Blake and I'm the guy who fixes your toilets, and that's always going to be the truth underneath whatever fantasy we were building. Tori's face did something complicated, pain and anger and resignation fighting for dominance. So that's it? 2 weeks of connection and you're ready to walk away because my bank account makes you uncomfortable? Your bank account means we were never in the same conversation. I thought I was talking to someone who understood struggle. You were talking to someone you could never see as an equal. I never... She stopped again, and Nathan saw the moment she decided to stop fighting. Her shoulders dropped slightly, the executive armor reasserting itself. You're right. This was a mistake. I apologize for wasting your time. The formality of it hurt worse than anything else. The distance between I'm sorry and I apologize for wasting your time, containing the entire gulf between who Nathan had thought Tori was and who Victoria Blake actually turned out to be. Pete's voice crackled over the radio, breaking the moment. Reed, we got power back on. How's it looking up there? Nathan keyed the radio without taking his eyes off Tori. Under control. I'll need a plumber to do permanent repairs on the pipe, but the temporary seal should hold until morning. Copy. Good work. The radio went silent. Neither of them moved. Water dripped rhythmically from Nathan's soaked clothes, each drop marking seconds that felt like hours. I should go. Tori finally broke eye contact, looking instead at the water spreading across expensive carpet. Thank you for saving the servers. I'll make sure facilities knows you prevented a major disaster. Don't bother. Just doing my job. She walked past him toward the elevators, her footsteps making small splashes, and Nathan told himself that tightness in his chest was residual adrenaline, not grief for something that had never really existed anyway. The elevator doors opened. Tori stepped inside, then paused, one hand holding the door. For what it's worth, Nathan, those conversations were the realest thing I've experienced in years. I'm sorry you can't believe that. The doors closed before he could respond. Nathan stood alone in the flooded corridor, emergency lights painting everything the color of warning, and felt the weight of his own stupidity settle across his shoulders. What had he expected? That a billionaire CEO genuinely cared about a widowed maintenance worker with a daughter and a mountain of debt? That their late-night talks meant the same thing to her as they did to him? That class and money and the fundamental structures of power could be overcome by good conversation and shared loneliness? He'd been an idiot. Worse, he'd started to hope. And hope was the most dangerous thing someone in his position could afford. Nathan spent the next 3 hours finishing his shift on autopilot, checking systems he could have mapped blindfolded, his mind replaying the confrontation in a loop that found new ways to make him feel stupid with each iteration. By the time 7 a.m. arrived and he could finally escape to his truck, exhaustion had soaked into his bones deeper than the water had penetrated his clothes. The drive to George's house took him through streets washed clean by overnight rain, the city looking scrubbed and new in early morning light that felt like a cruel joke. Nothing was new. Everything was exactly as it had always been, except now Nathan had the additional humiliation of having fallen for someone so far out of his league she might as well have been on another planet. George took one look at Nathan's face and poured coffee without asking questions. Lily was still asleep, giving Nathan 30 minutes to sit at the kitchen table and stare at his torn palms while his father bustled around making breakfast with deliberate normalcy. "You want to talk about it?" George finally asked, setting a plate of scrambled eggs in front of his son. "Not really." "Going to tell me anyway?" Nathan almost smiled, despite everything. His father knew him too well. "I met someone. At work. Thought maybe... I don't know what I thought. Turns out she's not who I believed she was." "She married?" "Divorced. But that's not the problem." Nathan pushed eggs around his plate without eating. "She's the CEO of the company that rents most of the building I work in. Billionaire. I'm the guy who unclogs her executive bathroom toilets. The whole thing was stupid from the start." George sat down across from him, coffee in hand, weathered face thoughtful. "You have feelings for her?" "Had. Past tense. Before I realized she'd been playing dress down to hang out with the working class like it was some kind of anthropological study." "Did she say that?" "She didn't have to. The math speaks for itself." Nathan finally managed a bite of eggs, chewing mechanically. "I told her things, Dad. Personal things. About Sarah, about struggling with Lily, about feeling like I'm drowning most days. And she just listened, like she understood. Except how could she possibly understand? She probably spends more on coffee in a month than I make." George was quiet for a long moment, sipping his coffee, and Nathan recognized the particular silence his father employed when choosing words carefully. "Your mother came from money. Did I ever tell you that?" Nathan's head snapped up. "What?" "Elizabeth's father owned a chain of hardware stores, 6 of them across the state. They had real money, not billionaire money, but enough that she could have gone to any college she wanted, married someone from her own class, lived a comfortable life." George stared into his coffee like it held memories. Instead, she fell for a plumber's apprentice with calloused hands and no prospects. Her family cut her off, said she was throwing her life away. This was news. In all the years since his mother's death, George had never mentioned any of this. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" "Didn't seem relevant. Your mother made her choice and never regretted it. But her family was right about one thing. We did struggle. Money was tight, especially after you were born. Sometimes Elizabeth would look at the stack of bills, and I'd see her wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake." "Did she make a mistake?" "She said no. Said the mistake would have been choosing an easy life over a real one." George met Nathan's eyes. "I'm not saying your situation is the same. I'm saying sometimes the gap between where people start isn't as important as where they're trying to go. If this woman was willing to meet you in the middle, maybe that means something." "She wasn't meeting me in the middle, Dad. She was hiding who she was because she knew I'd never..." Nathan stopped, because finishing that sentence meant admitting things he wasn't ready to face. "It doesn't matter. It's over." Lily's footsteps pounded down the hallway before George could respond, and then she was launching herself at Nathan with the enthusiasm of someone who'd been awake for approximately 30 seconds and had decided this was the best day ever. "Daddy! Grandpa said we could go to the aquarium today. The one with the penguins!" Nathan caught her, pulling her into his lap despite the protest from muscles still sore from wrestling broken pipes. "Did he now? That's pretty far. That's almost an hour drive." "But they have rainbow fish for my marine biology research." Over Lily's head, George gave Nathan a look that said, "Yes, I promised this because I knew you needed something good today, and you're welcome." "Then I guess we're going to the aquarium." Nathan kissed the top of his daughter's head, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo, letting her excitement push back the exhaustion for a few precious moments. "Go get dressed. We need to leave soon if we want to beat the crowds." Lily scrambled off his lap and thundered back down the hallway, already chattering about which fish she wanted to see first. Nathan stood up, his knee popping audibly, feeling every one of his 35 years. "Thanks, Dad." "That's what family does. We show up." George started clearing plates. "Now go take a shower. You smell like wet building." The aquarium trip was exactly what Nathan needed. 3 hours of watching Lily press her nose against glass tanks, listening to her confidently inform other children about fish species she'd just read about on the informational plaques, buying overpriced hot dogs from the cafeteria and not caring about the cost because her smile was worth it. They stood in front of the penguin exhibit while Lily counted birds and narrated their personalities, and Nathan felt some of the tension from the night shift start to dissolve. This was what mattered. Not complicated feelings about complicated women. Not the gap between his life and lives lived in penthouses. Just his daughter, his father, and the simple gift of a Saturday well spent. But on the drive home, with Lily asleep in the back seat and George dozing in the passenger seat, Nathan's mind drifted back to the confrontation in the flooded hallway, to the look on Victoria's, face when he'd accused her of slumming, to the way her voice had broken slightly when she said those conversations were the realest things she'd experienced in years. "You've been cruel. Deliberately, efficiently cruel, in the way of people who'd been hurt and wanted to distribute the pain." And maybe she deserved some of it for the deception, but Nathan couldn't shake the feeling that he'd destroyed something that might have been worth saving if he'd been brave enough to try. The feeling haunted him through the weekend, through Sunday dinner at George's house and Lily's bath time and the bedtime story he read in a monotone that made his daughter ask if he was sick. It followed him back to work Sunday night, where he deliberately avoided the 15th floor and took his breaks in the basement mechanical room where no one ever went. Danny cornered him Tuesday night in the supply closet, blocking the door with his substantial frame. "Okay, what's going on? You've been walking around like someone died and you won't talk to anybody." "Nothing's going on. I'm just tired." "Bullshit. I've known you 7 years. This is more than tired. This is heartbreak tired." "Who is she?" "There is no she. Drop it, Danny." But Danny Walsh had been widowed 3 years before Nathan lost Sarah, had navigated the same grief journey, and recognized the specific kind of pain that came from opening yourself up and getting devastated. He crossed his arms, settled his weight, and made it clear he wasn't moving until Nathan talked. The story came out in pieces. The late-night meetings, the coffee and tea, the conversations that made Nathan feel human again. Danny's expression shifted from curiosity to concern to outright alarm when Nathan got to the part about Victoria Blake. "Wait, hold on. The Victoria Blake? CEO Blake? You've been having midnight tea parties with a billionaire?" "They weren't tea parties. They were just talks." "Reed, man, do you have any idea what you're doing? That woman could buy and sell you 1,000 times over. She could have you fired for looking at her wrong. She wouldn't do that." "How do you know? You thought you knew her, and it turned out you didn't know anything important." Danny's voice gentled slightly. "Look, I get it. You've been lonely since Sarah. We all knew it was only a matter of time before you tried to connect with someone. But a billionaire CEO? That's not just out of your league. That's out of your sport." "I know that. Now. Which is why it's over." Danny studied him for a long moment. "Is it? Because you look like someone who wants it not to be over, but doesn't know how to fix it." Nathan didn't have an answer for that, So he pushed past Danny and went back to work, filling the hours until dawn with mechanical tasks that required no emotional investment. Thursday night, Pete called him up to the executive floor, a place Nathan typically only visited during emergencies or scheduled maintenance. He arrived at the reception desk outside the CEO's office suite to find a man in an expensive suit waiting, early 40s, Asian features, carrying the kind of authority that suggested he was used to people doing what he said. "Nathan Reed?" The man extended his hand. "Marcus Chen, CFO of Blake Industries. Thank you for coming up." Nathan shook the offered hand warily. "Is there a problem with the building systems?" "No, nothing like that. Please, come into the conference room." Marcus led him into a glass-walled space overlooking the city, gestured to a chair at the massive table, and sat down across from him with the ease of someone conducting business deals worth millions. Nathan remained standing, every instinct screaming that this was a trap. "Mr. Reed, I'll be direct. Victoria, Miss Blake, has told me about your acquaintance. I want to make sure we're all on the same page regarding expectations." The corporate speak made Nathan's jaw clench. "I'm not sure what you think is happening, but there's no acquaintance. I fixed a pipe, found a keychain, and had a few conversations with someone I didn't realize was my boss's boss's boss. That's it." "Good. I'm glad you understand the situation clearly." Marcus leaned back in his chair, evaluating. "Ms. Blake is an extraordinarily valuable executive. Her decisions affect thousands of employees, billions in market capitalization, and our client's critical security infrastructure. She can't afford distractions." Message received. We done here? Almost. I also wanted to personally thank you for your quick thinking during the sprinkler incident. Your actions saved us at minimum $15 million in data loss and recovery costs. Marcus slid a folder across the table. "This is a formal letter of commendation for your personnel file, along with a bonus of $5,000 for exceptional performance." Nathan stared at the folder like it contained a snake. "I don't want your money. It's not my money. It's compensation you earned by going above and beyond your job description. You prevented a disaster. The company compensates disaster prevention. This is guilt money. Or maybe insurance that I won't talk to anyone about your precious CEO having late-night conversations with the help." Marcus's expression didn't change. "This is standard corporate practice for employees who perform exceptional service. But if you'd like to refuse it based on pride, that's certainly your prerogative. I'm sure your daughter's college fund doesn't need it." The mention of Lily made Nathan see red. "Don't you dare bring my daughter into this." "I'm not bringing her into anything. I'm pointing out that $5,000 is meaningful money to someone in your financial position, and refusing it to make a point only hurts yourself and your family." Marcus stood up, adjusting his suit jacket. "Ms. Blake doesn't know about this meeting. She'd probably fire me if she did. But I've worked for her for 8 years, and I've never seen her as distracted as she's been this week. Whatever happened between you two, it's affecting her work. I'm asking you, professionally and personally, to stay away from her." "Already planned on it. We have nothing to say to each other." "Good." Marcus moved toward the door, then paused. "For what it's worth, Mr. Reed, I don't think you're a gold digger or opportunist. I think you're probably exactly what you appear to be, an honest man trying to do his best in difficult circumstances. But honest men can still cause damage when they're in situations above their understanding. This is above your understanding." He left before Nathan could respond, leaving the folder on the table like evidence of everything wrong with the universe. Nathan stood there for a full minute, rage and humiliation warring in his chest, before he grabbed the folder and walked out. He made it to the stairwell before ripping the folder open. The letter was professionally written corporate nonsense about exemplary service and dedication. The check, printed on official Blake Industries letterhead, was made out for $5,000 to Nathan Reed. $5,000. Almost 2 months of rent. A meaningful dent in his medical debt. The difference between constant financial anxiety and a brief moment of breathing room. Marcus Chen knew exactly what he was doing, offering money Nathan desperately needed in exchange for staying away from Victoria Blake. It was elegant and cruel and effective. Nathan should have ripped the check into pieces, should have marched back to that conference room and told Marcus Chen exactly where he could shove his compensation. Instead, he folded both pieces of paper carefully, put them in his jacket pocket, and went back to work. That night, around 3 a.m., his radio crackled with an unfamiliar voice. "Maintenance, this is Blake Executive Office. We have a coffee maker malfunction, minor water leak. Can someone address it?" It was a nothing job, the kind of thing Nathan would normally send to the day shift crew. But something made him key his radio and respond. "Copy. I'll handle it." The executive floor was dark, except for a single office with lights still burning. Nathan approached cautiously, tool bag in hand, and found Victoria Blake sitting at an enormous desk covered in paperwork, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, reading glasses perched on her nose. She looked up when he entered and froze, clearly not expecting him. "I can come back if," Nathan started. "No, please. The coffee maker is over there." She gestured to a small kitchen area off her office, then returned her attention to the documents in front of her with forced concentration. Nathan found the problem immediately. Someone had overfilled the water reservoir and it was leaking onto the counter. He sopped up the water with paper towels, adjusted the reservoir, ran a test brew to confirm everything was working. The whole repair took maybe 3 minutes. He should have left. Should have radioed Pete that the job was done and gotten out before this conversation happened. But his feet wouldn't move, and Victoria was still pretending to read the same page she'd been staring at since he arrived. And finally, Nathan heard himself say, "I met with Marcus Chen tonight." Her pen stopped moving. She didn't look up. "He had no right to involve himself in my personal life. He gave me $5,000 to stay away from you. Well, technically for saving your servers, but we both know what it actually was." Now Victoria did look up, and her expression was thunderous. "He what?" "Relax, I'm not actually taking it." Nathan pulled the check from his pocket and set it on her desk. "But I want you to know it was tempting. $5,000 would change a lot for me and Lily. The fact that you can throw that around as a bribe without even thinking about it, that's the problem. That's always been the problem." Victoria stood up, grabbing her phone. "I'm calling Marcus right now to—" "Don't." He was doing his job, protecting his CEO from distraction, from someone above his understanding, quote unquote. That's not his decision to make. No, it's yours. And you made it when you decided not to tell me who you really were. Nathan crossed his arms, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. "I'm not here to rehash the argument. I'm here because you called maintenance and I answered. The coffee maker is fixed. I'm going back to work." "Nathan, wait!" Her voice caught on his name, and when he looked back, she was standing behind her desk like it was a barrier protecting her from something dangerous. "Can we please talk? Actually talk, not just yell at each other in flooded hallways?" "What's left to say?" "That I miss you. That our conversations were the only thing making this bearable." She gestured at her office, her paperwork, the entire empire she'd built. "I know I should have told you from the beginning. You're right about that. But I'm not sorry I got to know you. I'm only sorry I ruined it by being a coward." The honesty was almost harder to bear than the original deception. Nathan felt his resolve cracking, the anger that had sustained him for a week starting to dissolve into something more complicated. "Victoria, Tori, please, let me be Tori with you, even if it's just for 5 minutes." And that was the crux of it, wasn't it? She wanted to be Tori with him, to shed the weight of Victoria Blake and exist as something smaller, more manageable. But she couldn't actually stop being Victoria Blake any more than Nathan could stop being a maintenance worker with a dead wife and a daughter depending on him. "I can't do this." The words came out quieter than he intended. "Every time I look at you, I'm going to remember that you're worth $3 billion, and I'm worth maybe -50,000 if you count my debt. I'm going to remember that you own this building and I clean it, that you make in interest what I make in a year." Those facts don't change just because we have nice conversations. They don't have to matter. They've always mattered. They matter to Marcus, to your board, to everyone who looks at us and sees a CEO and her janitor. They matter to my daughter, who's going to get old enough to understand that daddy's girlfriend could buy her entire school and wonder what that means. Nathan's voice rose despite his best efforts. "They matter to me because I can't be with someone I can't meet halfway. I have nothing to offer you except more conversations, and I can't even afford the coffee for those." Victoria, Tori, whoever she was, walked around the desk until she was standing a foot away from him, close enough that Nathan could smell her perfume and see the exhaustion in her eyes that matched his own. "What if I don't want you to offer me anything? What if I just want you?" "Then you're not thinking clearly. You'll realize that eventually, and this whole thing will end worse than it's ending now. You don't know that. I know that I've already been the poor one in a relationship with someone who had more options. Sarah could have married someone with better health insurance, someone who could have gotten her treatment faster, someone who could have saved her life. She chose me, and it cost her everything." His voice broke. "I won't be the person who cost someone else their future. Nathan, Sarah's death wasn't your fault." "Wasn't it? The doctor said if we'd caught it 6 months earlier, she might have survived. We couldn't afford the good screening tests. Had to wait for symptoms. By then it was too late." The confession tore out of him like glass. "So no, I can't be with someone whose money could solve every practical problem I have, because I'd never know if you stayed out of love or out of guilt for having what I don't." Tori stood in the center of the Blake Industries boardroom 3 weeks later, watching 15 faces that had once shown respect, now barely concealing their judgment. The emergency meeting had been called by Richard Holt, the silver-haired board member who'd opposed her aggressive expansion strategy for years, and finally saw his opening. "Let me make sure I understand correctly, Victoria. You're proposing we promote a maintenance worker, someone with no college degree, no management experience, to Director of Facilities Infrastructure at a salary of $180,000 annually." Marcus shifted uncomfortably to her left, the only ally at the table, though even he'd tried to talk her out of this before the meeting. The others watched with the predatory interest of sharks sensing blood in the water. Nathan Reed prevented $15 million in data loss during the sprinkler incident. He's identified and resolved chronic infrastructure issues that our contracted facilities management firm missed repeatedly. His practical knowledge of building systems is extraordinary. Tori kept her voice level, professional, even as her pulse hammered. This isn't favoritism, it's recognizing actual competence. Competence you discovered during what, exactly? Late-night coffee dates in empty hallways? Richard leaned back in his chair, satisfaction evident. The optics alone are catastrophic. CEO promotes her romantic interest to executive position. The lawsuits write themselves. There is no romantic relationship. Mr. Reed and I had professional conversations about building systems. That's all. Professional conversations at 3 a.m. while he was supposed to be working. Another board member, Catherine Wu, tapped her tablet screen. I have the security logs. 47 instances over 5 weeks of you and Mr. Reed on the same floor during his shift. Average duration, 90 minutes. The trap had been set long before Tori walked into this room. They'd been gathering evidence, building their case, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. She'd handed them the ammunition by letting her personal life bleed into professional territory, by caring about someone she couldn't protect from corporate warfare. Mr. Reed earned this promotion through merit. The fact that we happened to develop a friendship is irrelevant. A friendship that ended badly enough that he refused a $5,000 performance bonus and hasn't been seen on executive floors since. Richard pulled out his own tablet. I also have testimony from 3 maintenance workers who've noticed his friendship with you made him distracted and less effective at his job. One incident report of him snapping at a coworker. Another of him requesting shift changes to avoid certain floors. Tori's hands clenched under the table. They'd interviewed Nathan's colleague. They built a case that her presence in his life had been destructive rather than beneficial. And they were probably right. What do you want, Richard? I want you to withdraw this promotion recommendation. I want you to acknowledge that your judgment has been compromised by personal entanglement. And I want assurance that you'll maintain appropriate boundaries with subordinate staff going forward. The room held its collective breath. Marcus caught her eye, gave the tiniest shake of his head. This was a fight she couldn't win, not without damaging the company she'd spent 15 years building. The recommendation is withdrawn. The words tasted like defeat. Meeting adjourned. Tori walked out before anyone could see her face crack, before the control she'd maintained for 45 minutes could shatter. Her office felt like a prison when she closed the door behind her. All that glass and steel and expensive furniture suddenly suffocating. Her phone buzzed. Text from her mother, Margaret Blake. Heard about the board meeting. We need to talk. Tonight. Tori deleted the message without responding, then pulled up her email and began drafting her resignation letter. Not out of drama or wounded pride, but because she suddenly understood what Nathan had tried to tell her 3 weeks ago in this very office. The gap between their worlds wasn't just about money. It was about power structures she benefited from without even noticing. Systems designed to keep people like her elevated and people like him contained. She could offer Nathan a promotion, but it would be tainted by their history. She could offer him money, but it would feel like charity. She could offer him her genuine feelings, but they'd always be shadowed by the imbalance that made everything she gave suspect. The only thing she could actually offer was to remove herself from the equation entirely. Marcus knocked and entered without waiting for permission, his expression grim. Don't do anything rash. Rash would have been telling Richard exactly where he could shove his optics concerns. This is calculated. Tori continued typing. I'm stepping down as CEO. You'll take over. The company will be better for it. Tori, stop. You're upset. I'm clear-headed for the first time in months. She hit send, forwarding the draft to the board secretary, then closed her laptop. I built this company by sacrificing everything personal. My marriage failed because I couldn't stop working. I don't have friends outside the industry. I can't remember the last time I did something just because it made me happy. She met Marcus's eyes. I met someone who saw me as a person, and my first instinct was to hide who I was because I knew the truth would ruin it. That's not a life. That's a very expensive prison. So you're going to throw away your career over a maintenance worker you've known for 2 months? I'm choosing myself over a company that will outlive me regardless. You've been ready to take over for years. The board will approve the transition. Blake Industries will be fine. She stood up, began gathering personal items from her desk. I'm the one who's been dying slowly, and I didn't even notice until Nathan held up a mirror. Marcus watched her pack with the resignation of someone who'd known this was coming and couldn't stop it. What are you going to do? Figure out who Victoria Blake is when she's not a CEO. Maybe learn to be just Tori for a while. The resignation went public within 24 hours. Her phone exploded with messages from investors, colleagues, journalists wanting statements. Tori turned it off and sat in her penthouse apartment, the one she'd bought for the view and rarely looked at, feeling simultaneously lighter and more lost than she'd felt since her mother died 16 years ago. Margaret arrived that evening without calling first, letting herself in with the key Tori had given her years ago for emergencies. Her mother looked immaculate as always, silver hair styled perfectly, wearing a designer suit that cost more than Nathan probably made in a month. Have you lost your mind? No greeting, no pretense of concern, just judgment delivered with surgical precision. Hello, Mother. I'm fine, thanks for asking. Don't be flippant. You resigned from the company you built. Over what? Some man you barely know? I resigned because I was miserable and too afraid to admit it. Tori didn't get up from the couch, didn't offer her mother a seat. When was the last time you saw me genuinely happy? Happiness is overrated. Success matters. Achieve means matters. I've achieved everything I set out to achieve, and I'm more alone now than when I started. So what was the point? Margaret's expression flickered with something that might have been pain if she'd allowed such weakness. The point was proving that Elizabeth's daughter could build an empire, that you could succeed where I failed. It was the first time Margaret had mentioned Tori's grandmother in decades. Elizabeth Blake had died when Tori was 12, leaving behind a daughter who'd spent the rest of her life trying to fill the void with accomplishments that never quite measured up to a dead woman's expectations. I'm not trying to prove anything to grandmother anymore. She's been gone 16 years. At some point, we have to stop living for ghosts. Easy to say when you're throwing away everything she built, everything I helped you build. You helped me build a career. You didn't help me build a life. There's a difference. Tori finally stood, moved to the window overlooking the city. I met someone who reminded me what it feels like to be seen as a person rather than a portfolio. And I destroyed that by being too afraid to be honest. I'm not making that mistake again. So you'll what? Chase after this maintenance worker? Beg him to take you back now that you're no longer a CEO? No. I'll leave him alone like he asked. But I'm also not going to keep living in a way that makes me incapable of connection. She turned to face her mother. I'm selling this place, moving somewhere smaller, maybe taking some time to figure out what I actually want instead of what I'm supposed to want. Margaret looked at her daughter like she was speaking a foreign language. You sound like your father. Right before he left. The comparison was meant to wound, to remind Tori that her father had walked away when she was 5, choosing freedom over family, leaving Margaret to raise a daughter alone while building her own moderately successful consulting firm. It was the source of every drive, success, achievement lecture Tori had endured growing up. Maybe Dad had a point. Maybe there are worse things than walking away from what's killing you. Like being weak? Like giving up? Margaret's voice sharpened to a blade. I raised you better than this. You raised me to achieve, to succeed, to never show weakness or need help or admit that money can't solve every problem. Tori felt tears threatening for the first time in years. You didn't raise me to be happy. You didn't teach me how to let people in. And now I'm 38 years old with no idea how to be in a relationship that isn't transactional. Relationships are transactional. Love is transactional. Anyone who tells you otherwise is lying or naive. Nathan wasn't either of those things. He was honest in a way I'd forgotten was possible. Margaret's expression shifted from anger to something colder, more calculating. The maintenance worker. The one you're destroying your life over. What's his full name? Tori's stomach dropped. Why? Just curious about the man who convinced my daughter to commit professional suicide. Stay away from him. I mean it, Mother. Whatever you're thinking, don't. I'm not thinking anything. I'm just trying to understand what could possibly be special enough about someone so ordinary to justify this level of self-destruction. Margaret moved toward the door. But if you're determined to throw your life away, I can't stop you. Just don't expect me to watch. She left without another word, and Tori stood in the echoing silence of her penthouse, knowing with absolute certainty that her mother would do exactly what Tori had forbidden. Margaret Blake didn't make idle inquiries. She gathered intelligence and used it strategically. Tori grabbed her phone, turned it back on long enough to text Marcus. My mother is going to investigate Nathan Reed. Stop her if you can. Then she turned it off again before she could see his response. 3 days later, Nathan was changing Lily's sheets when his phone rang with an unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Mr. Reed? This is Margaret Blake, Victoria's mother. I'd like to meet with you. Tomorrow, if possible. Nathan's grip tightened on the phone. I have nothing to say to you. That's fine. I have plenty to say to you. There's a diner on 5th and Maple, 1 p.m. tomorrow. Come alone. She hung up before he could refuse. Nathan stood in Lily's room, clean sheets forgotten, feeling dread settle into his bones. This wasn't a friendly chat. This was an ambush. He should ignore it, should delete the number and pretend the call never happened. But curiosity and something darker, maybe the need to understand what Tori's world looked like from the inside, made him text George asking if he could watch Lily tomorrow afternoon. The diner was the kind of place Margaret Blake had probably never entered before. Vinyl booths and laminated menus, and coffee served in thick ceramic mugs. She looked profoundly out of place in her designer clothes, sitting in a corner booth with a cup of tea she hadn't touched. Nathan slid into the seat across from her without greeting, waiting for whatever attack she'd prepared. Thank you for coming. I know my daughter told you I'd investigated you, so let's not pretend this is a friendly conversation. Margaret placed a manila folder on the table between them. You have $83,000 in medical debt from your wife's cancer treatment. Your truck is one failed inspection away from being condemned. You work 60-hour weeks and still barely make enough to cover rent and childcare. The recitation of his failures made Nathan's jaw clench. Is there a point to this humiliation? The point is understanding what my daughter sees in you, since it clearly isn't financial stability or social status. Margaret opened the folder, revealing printed bank statements and credit reports Nathan hadn't authorized anyone to access. You're drowning, Mr. Reed. One emergency away from losing everything. Yet you refused a $5,000 bonus that would have made a material difference in your life. I refused guilt money. There's a difference. No. You refused help because your pride is more important than your daughter's well-being. That's not noble. That's selfish. The words hit harder because they'd been Nathan's own thought at 3 a.m. when he couldn't sleep, when the weight of his responsibilities felt crushing. But hearing them from this woman, this wealthy, judgmental stranger who'd probably never worried about money in her entire life, made rage burn through the shame. Did you come here just to tell me I'm a bad father? Because I already know I'm failing. I don't need you to itemize exactly how. I came to offer you a way out. Margaret pulled a check from the folder, placed it face up on the table. $100,000 made out to Nathan Reed. This pays off your medical debt, covers 6 months of living expenses while you get proper training, and gives you a buffer for your daughter's future. All you have to do is sign an agreement that you'll have no further contact with Victoria. Nathan stared at the check, his vision narrowing to those 6 figures that represented more money than he'd see in 2 years of maintenance work. Life-changing money. Freedom from the constant anxiety that woke him up at night. The ability to actually provide for Lily instead of just barely surviving. You're bribing me to stay away from your daughter. I'm solving a problem efficiently. You need money. Victoria needs you to disappear from her life so she can rebuild her career. This benefits everyone. Except it assumes I want money more than I want. He stopped because he'd been about to say, your daughter, and that wasn't true. He'd ended things with Tori himself. He'd been the one who walked away. This assumes I'm for sale. Everyone's for sale, Mr. Reed. It's just a matter of price. Margaret's expression was as cold as Nathan imagined Tori's had been in boardrooms, the Ice Queen legacy passed down through generations. $100,000. Take it and give my daughter the space she needs to move on with her life. Nathan reached across the table, picked up the check with hands that wanted to shake but didn't, and slowly tore it in half. Then quarters, then eighths. He let the pieces fall like snow onto the table between them. Tell your daughter she raised her offer from $5,000 to $100,000. But I'm still not interested in being bought off. If she wants me gone, she can ask herself. He stood up, threw a $5 bill on the table for the coffee he hadn't ordered, and walked out before Margaret could respond. His hands were shaking now, adrenaline and fury, and the sick knowledge that he'd just refused money that could have solved every practical problem in his life. George was watching TV with Lily when Nathan got back to the house. One look at his son's face, and he sent Lily to her room to play, then poured Nathan a whiskey, despite it being 3 p.m. Tori's mother offered me $100,000 to disappear. Nathan downed the whiskey in one swallow, welcoming the burn. I said no. George poured another finger of whiskey. Good. Good? Dad, that was enough money to clear my debt and buy a reliable truck and put something away for Lily's college. I just threw that away because my pride is apparently more important than my daughter's future. Your daughter's future includes learning that her father has integrity. That's worth more than money. Integrity doesn't pay rent. No, but it lets you look at yourself in the mirror. George sat down across from Nathan, his weathered face serious. When your mother got sick, her family offered me money to leave her. Said they'd cover all her medical expenses and set her up comfortably if I'd just get out of the picture. They thought I was trash dragging down their daughter. This was the second revelation in a week about his mother's family. What did you do? Told them to go to hell. We struggled, we fought with insurance companies, we went into debt. But we did it together. And when Elizabeth died, I knew I'd chosen right. George's eyes were distant. Money would have been easier. Money would have solved everything. But it would have destroyed what we had. Tori and I don't have anything. I ended it. Did you? Or did you run away because being with her scared you more than being alone? The question hung in the air unanswered. Nathan thought about Tori standing in her office 3 weeks ago, asking him to let her be Tori instead of Victoria, about the way she'd looked at him like he mattered more than her $3 billion, about conversations at 3 a.m. that had made him feel human again after 2 years of just surviving. He told himself he was protecting her from his inadequacy, from the gap between their worlds. But maybe George was right. Maybe he'd just been afraid. Lily appeared in the doorway, holding her keychain craft project, a new one she'd made at school, decorated with stickers and the words, "Daddy is brave" in marker. "Grandpa, can we go get ice cream?" "Sure, Pumpkin. Go get your shoes." George waited until she'd run off, then looked at Nathan. "You know where the woman lives?" "Dad." "Go. Lily and I will have ice cream and watch a movie. You go figure out if you're running from something or toward something." Nathan wanted to argue, but George's expression made it clear the conversation was over. He found himself in his truck 20 minutes later, driving toward the address he'd found in the Blake Industries directory he definitely wasn't supposed to have access to, his heart hammering against his ribs. The building was everything Nathan expected: high-rise luxury in the expensive part of downtown, doorman who looked at his truck like it was contaminating the neighborhood, lobby with marble floors that probably cost more per square foot than Nathan's entire apartment. The doorman refused to let him up without calling first, so Nathan stood in the lobby like an idiot while the man made the call. "Ms. Blake says to send you up." The doorman sounded disappointed. "Penthouse level." The elevator rose so smoothly, Nathan could barely feel the movement, depositing him in a private hallway with a single door. He knocked before he could talk himself out of it. Tori opened the door in sweatpants and an old t-shirt, her hair in a messy bun, no makeup, looking more human than he'd ever seen her. Her eyes went wide when she saw him. "Nathan? Did my mother—" "Your mother tried to pay me off. $100,000 to never contact you again." He stepped inside, uninvited, suddenly furious. "Were you testing me? Seeing if I could be bought?" "What? No! I told her to stay away from you." Tori closed the door. "I didn't know she'd— I'm so sorry. That's unconscionable." I turned it down, tore up the check right in front of her. "Of course you did, because you're stubborn and proud and—" She stopped, really looking at him. "Why are you here, Nathan?" "Because my dad thinks I'm running scared instead of making a principled stand. Because I keep thinking about what you said about wanting to be just Tori. Because—" He forced the truth out. "Because I miss you. I miss our conversations. I miss feeling like someone actually sees me." Tori's expression crumpled. "I miss you too. So much. But you were right about everything you said. The gap between our worlds, the power imbalance, all of it. I can't fix that just by wanting to." "What if I don't need you to fix it? What if I just need you to meet me halfway?" "How? You won't take my help. You refuse my money. I resigned from my company and you're still standing there telling me we're too different." "You what?" "Resigned. 2 days ago. The board was building a case against both of us, using our friendship as evidence of my compromised judgment. They were right, so I quit." Tori gestured at the penthouse around them. "I'm selling this place, moving somewhere normal, trying to figure out who I am when I'm not a CEO." Nathan felt the world shift under his feet. "You gave up your company? For what?" "For myself. For the chance to be someone who's capable of actual human connection, instead of just transactional relationships." She moved closer. "Not for you, Nathan. You made it clear you don't want me involved in your life. But I couldn't keep being Victoria Blake. She was suffocating me." They stood in the ridiculous penthouse, with its floor-to-ceiling windows and its view of a city neither of them felt part of anymore, and Nathan saw clearly for the first time what he'd been too afraid to admit before. The gap between them wasn't about money. It was about courage. The courage to be vulnerable, to accept help, to build something together instead of maintaining separate fortresses. I was wrong. The admission came hard. About us being too different. About not being able to meet halfway. I was scared that loving you meant failing Lily the way I failed Sarah. So I pushed you away before you could leave first. Nathan, let me finish. Sarah died because we couldn't afford better health care. That's true. But staying alone and miserable won't bring her back. And teaching Lily that love is too dangerous to risk, that's not protecting her. That's just passing down my fear. Tori's eyes were wet now, her careful control dissolving. What are you saying? I'm saying I don't know how this works. I'm saying the practical problems are still real and I'm still drowning most days. I'm saying I'm terrified of failing you the way I've failed everyone else. He took her hands, finally allowing himself to touch her. But I'm more terrified of living the rest of my life wondering what we could have been if I'd been brave enough to try. She pulled him close, and they stood there holding each other in the penthouse that was already sold in her mind, in the life she'd already decided to leave behind. When she finally spoke, her voice was muffled against his shoulder. I don't need you to be perfect. I just need you to let me in. Let me be part of your life, part of Lily's life, not as someone solving problems, but as someone who cares. I can do that, I think, if you're patient while I figure out how. I've got time. I just quit my job, remember? Suddenly, I have nothing but time. They laughed, and Nathan felt something in his chest that had been locked tight since Sarah died begin to crack open. Not healing, that would take longer, but the possibility of healing. The idea that maybe loving again didn't mean forgetting, and accepting help didn't mean failure, and two people from different worlds could build something new if they were both willing to try.